You thought you were the third person. Until he finally revealed why he could never let you go. My beloved child, for just a moment, set aside every conclusion you have been carrying, because sometimes the story you believed you were living is only the surface of something far more meaningful. There are seasons when the heart quietly accepts a role it was never truly meant to have. You looked at the distance, the unanswered moments, the presence of someone else, and gently convinced yourself that perhaps you were only standing on the outside of someone else's life. But what if that wasn't the truth at all? What if every assumption you made was built from what you could see, while the real answer was hidden inside everything you couldn't? Don't skip, because the next few moments may reshape the way you understand this connection entirely. The person you love carried a secret they never found the right words to explain. It wasn't hidden because they wanted to confuse anyone. It remained unspoken because some feelings become so deep that ordinary language no longer seems enough. Every time they thought about telling you the truth, they stopped themselves, wondering whether the timing was finally right. Then life became busy. Conversations became shorter. Opportunities quietly slipped away. Yet one thing never changed. Whenever your name crossed their mind, everything else seemed to fade into the background, as though their heart instinctively remembered something their voice had never managed to express. Have you ever noticed how the strongest connections rarely demand constant attention to remain alive? They simply continue existing beneath every ordinary day, waiting patiently until two hearts are ready to understand what has been there all along. That is exactly what happened here. While everyone around them believed they had already chosen a different direction, the person you love kept comparing every meaningful moment to the peace they once felt with you. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't planned. It simply happened, again and again, until they realized they had been measuring every relationship against a feeling that only one person had ever given them. Something important is waiting for you, because the truth they discovered surprised even them. One quiet evening, someone close asked a simple question that seemed almost insignificant. Who is the first person you think of when life becomes overwhelming? The room fell silent. They smiled politely, but inside, the answer arrived before the question had even finished. It wasn't the person everyone expected. It wasn't the person standing closest. It was you. In that silent realization, they understood something they had never admitted aloud. You were never an afterthought. You were never standing behind anyone else. The only reason it seemed that way was because circumstances spoke louder than feelings for a little while. Stay till the end, because this realization became impossible for them to ignore. From that day forward, they began noticing details they had overlooked for far too long. Every meaningful memory somehow included you. Every future they quietly imagined somehow made space for you. And the more honest they became with themselves, the more one difficult question refused to disappear. If you were truly the third person, then why had your place in their heart never once felt third? That question stayed with them long after everyone else had moved on, and before another sunrise arrived, they made a quiet decision that would finally bring the hidden reason into the light. The answer did not arrive in a dramatic confession. It revealed itself through a series of quiet moments that, when placed together, formed a picture no one had noticed before. The person you love began looking back, not with regret, but with clarity. They remembered every crossroads where life seemed to pull them in one direction while their heart quietly leaned toward another. At the time, they thought they were simply making practical choices. Only now did they realize they had been postponing the truth, not replacing it. Don't skip. Because this is where the story begins to unfold in a completely different way. There was someone else in their life, and from the outside, it seemed as though everything was already decided. Friends assumed they knew the ending. Conversations carried certainty. Even those closest to them believed they had found the person they would build their future with. But inside, something never settled. They kept waiting for a feeling that never fully arrived. Then, one ordinary afternoon, they heard someone mention your name in passing. It lasted only a moment. Just a few words. Yet everything inside them became unexpectedly still. The conversation around them continued, but they barely heard another sentence. Their thoughts had already traveled somewhere else, back to the moments that made them feel understood without explanation, accepted without conditions, and peaceful without effort. That was the moment they stopped asking themselves whether they cared about you. Instead, they began asking why those feelings had never left. Something important is waiting for you. For days, they carried that question quietly. They noticed something they had overlooked for far too long. Whenever they imagined success, happiness, or even simple everyday moments, your presence appeared naturally in those thoughts. Not because they forced it. Because their heart had already made room for you long ago. Slowly, they understood the truth. You were never standing behind someone else. You only believed you were because life had placed distance where honesty should have been. The other person had occupied time. You had occupied their heart. There is a difference. A difference they were finally mature enough to recognize. Stay till the end. Because one evening, while sitting alone with nothing but their own thoughts, they whispered something they had never allowed themselves to say before. I've been protecting everyone else's expectations, except my own heart. The words felt both freeing and humbling. In that quiet confession, they realized they hadn't been afraid of loving you. They had been afraid of changing a story that everyone else believed was already written. But stories are not completed by assumptions. They are completed by truth. And before the next day had fully begun, they decided they would stop allowing silence to speak in their place. The first step they took was so simple that almost anyone would have missed it. Yet that single step would quietly begin bringing the two of you closer than either of you imagined possible. There comes a moment when silence can no longer protect the truth. It can only delay it. The person you love reached that moment without even realizing it at first. They had spent so much time trying to keep everyone comfortable that they had forgotten what it felt like to be completely honest with themselves. Then, one quiet morning, everything changed through a realization so simple that it could no longer be ignored. They asked themselves one question. If life suddenly became quiet, if no one else's opinions existed, where would my heart naturally go? The answer arrived instantly. It didn't need to be searched for. It had been waiting all along. It led to you. Don't skip, because this realization became impossible to hide. For the first time, they stopped thinking about who entered their life first, and started thinking about who truly understood them. They remembered conversations that lasted only a few minutes but stayed in their heart for months. They remembered how you noticed emotions they never spoke aloud. They remembered feeling seen instead of judged, appreciated instead of compared, and peaceful instead of uncertain. That was when another truth quietly unfolded. You had never been competing with anyone. You were carrying a place in their heart that no comparison could ever reach. The confusion came because life arranged the circumstances one way, while their heart arranged them another. Something important is waiting for you. Later that day, someone close noticed they seemed unusually thoughtful. You've been smiling to yourself lately, they said. The person you love laughed softly. I think I've finally stopped running from something. No further explanation was given. None was needed. Sometimes the heart speaks most clearly through the peace that suddenly appears after a long season of uncertainty. As evening settled in, they found themselves looking through old memories, not searching for what had been lost, but rediscovering what had quietly remained. Every meaningful moment connected to you carried the same feeling. Authenticity. Nothing had been forced. Nothing had needed to be proven. Everything had simply felt real. Stay till the end. Because that's when they understood the hidden reason they could never let you go. It wasn't because they were afraid of losing you. It wasn't because they were holding on to the past. It was because every version of the future that genuinely made them smile somehow included you. That realization brought an unexpected calm. No more confusion. No more pretending. Only one quiet certainty growing stronger with every passing hour. And as they prepared to act on that certainty, an unexpected conversation began unfolding nearby. It wasn't planned. It wasn't overheard by accident. But the words spoken in that conversation would confirm something they had only just begun to believe. That someone else had already recognized where their heart truly belonged long before they did themselves. The conversation began so quietly that it almost blended into the ordinary rhythm of the day. No one expected it to become memorable. It started with casual words, gentle laughter, and familiar voices. Yet sometimes, the most life-changing truths arrive disguised as ordinary conversations. The person you love wasn't trying to listen. The words simply reached them. One voice said softly, "You know, I've noticed something about you." They looked up with quiet curiosity. You always seem most alive when one particular person comes into the conversation. For a moment, they smiled without answering. Not because they wished to avoid the question, but because their heart had already answered before their lips ever could. Don't skip, because what happened next revealed more than they were prepared to admit. Another voice gently added, "It's strange. Whenever everyone assumes you've moved on, your eyes tell a completely different story." Those words settled into the silence. The person you love didn't feel exposed. They felt understood. For the first time, someone had recognized what they had spent so long trying to hide, not through dramatic gestures, but through the small moments no one usually notices. The quiet smile. The thoughtful pauses. The way your name always softened their expression. They suddenly realized something remarkable. The truth had been visible all along. They were simply the last person willing to accept it. Something important is waiting for you. Later that evening, they reflected on those words again. Not with embarrassment. With gratitude. Because sometimes another person's perspective allows us to see what our own heart has been patiently trying to reveal. They stopped asking whether they should let go. Instead, they asked something far more honest. Why have I been trying to convince myself to release the one connection that has consistently brought me peace? There was no answer. Only a quiet smile. And sometimes, that is answer enough. As the night grew still, they finally understood the hidden reason they had never been able to let you go. It had nothing to do with habit. Nothing to do with unfinished chapters. Nothing to do with uncertainty. It was because every meaningful lesson life had taught them somehow pointed back toward the person who accepted them before they fully accepted themselves. That person was you. Stay till the end. Because with that realization came one final decision. No more waiting for the perfect moment. The moment they remembered those exact words, everything they planned to do next became wonderfully clear. Before the sunrise painted the sky with its first light, the person you love found themselves sitting in complete stillness. Nothing around them demanded an answer. Nothing pushed them forward. Yet their heart had already begun moving long before the morning arrived. The promise they had almost forgotten returned with surprising clarity. It wasn't a promise made during a dramatic moment. It had been spoken quietly, almost as a whisper to themselves. If life ever gives me another chance, I won't let fear speak louder than my heart. For years, those words remained hidden beneath everyday responsibilities, unexpected changes, and the opinions of people who believed they understood the story. But promises made from the heart have a remarkable way of waiting. They don't disappear. They simply remain patient until courage catches up. Don't skip. Because this is where everything begins to feel different. As they reflected on every step that had brought them here, one realization became impossible to ignore. They had spent so much time worrying about who arrived first, who stayed longer, or what everyone else believed, that they had forgotten to ask the simplest question of all. Who has always felt like home? The answer never changed. Whenever life became uncertain. Whenever joy needed someone to be shared with. Whenever hope quietly returned after a difficult season. Their thoughts always found you. Not by force. Not by habit. But naturally. That was the hidden truth they had been trying to understand all along. Something important is waiting for you. Later that morning, someone close noticed an unusual confidence in them. You seem lighter today, they said. The person you love smiled. I stopped carrying a story that never belonged to me. Those few words held more meaning than anyone realized. They were no longer living according to assumptions. They were no longer allowing silence to define their feelings. For the first time in a long while, they felt completely aligned with their own heart. As they walked through the day, little reminders of you appeared in the most ordinary places. A familiar melody. A quiet phrase. A place that carried an old memory. None of these moments felt painful. They felt reassuring. Almost as though life was gently reminding them that some connections are not measured by constant closeness, but by the peace they continue to bring regardless of time or distance. Stay till the end. Because by evening, they had made one final decision. They would no longer wonder what might have happened. They would create the opportunity to find out. Not to change the past. Not to erase anyone else's chapter. But to finally honor the truth they had carried for so long. And just as they prepared to take that first genuine step toward you, they received unexpected news that made them stop in their tracks. News that revealed your heart had been quietly making its own journey during this very same time, without either of you knowing it. Before they could take another step, they remained still for a moment, letting that unexpected news settle gently within them. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was simply enough to remind them that life often moves in quiet harmony long before anyone notices it. They realized something they had overlooked for far too long. While they had been learning how to understand their own heart, you had also been growing in ways they never imagined. The distance between you had never been empty. It had been filled with unseen moments, quiet lessons, and the kind of personal growth that only time can offer. Don't skip. Because this realization changed the meaning of everything that came before. For the first time, they stopped seeing the past as a collection of missed chances. Instead, they saw it as preparation. Every delay had taught patience. Every unanswered question had taught understanding. Every quiet season had shown them that genuine affection does not disappear simply because life becomes complicated. It matures. It becomes calmer. It becomes less about holding on, and more about appreciating what is truly real. That evening, they found themselves looking at the sky with an unexpected sense of gratitude. They smiled softly, remembering all the times they believed you had slipped too far away to ever understand what was in their heart. Now, they weren't so sure. Something inside them whispered that perhaps the story had never been about losing each other. Perhaps it had always been about becoming the people who could finally meet without fear, without confusion, and without pretending to be anyone else. Something important is waiting for you. As the hours passed, they opened a notebook they hadn't touched in a long time. Between ordinary pages filled with forgotten thoughts, one sentence caught their attention. The right person is not the one who creates the loudest emotions, but the one who quietly brings you back to yourself. They stared at those words for a long while. Then they laughed softly. I knew the answer before I even wrote this. It was as though their own past had been gently encouraging their present all along. In that quiet moment, everything became beautifully simple. You were never the third person. You were the one they kept comparing every meaningful connection to, even when they didn't realize they were doing it. You were the measure their heart quietly returned to whenever life offered another path. Not because anyone else lacked value, but because what they experienced with you carried a sense of peace they never found anywhere else. Stay till the end. As night settled in, they made one final promise to themselves. No more waiting for perfect circumstances. No more believing that silence will somehow explain what only honesty can. With a calm heart and a clear mind, they reached for the message they had carefully rewritten so many times before. This time, they didn't pause. This time, they didn't erase a single word. Because they had finally discovered the hidden reason they could never let you go. It was never about holding on to the past. It was about recognizing that, through every chapter of life, your place in their heart had quietly remained the one place that always felt like the beginning of something beautiful. And just as that message was about to reach you, an unexpected response was already making its way toward them, one that would reveal this connection had been changing both of your lives in ways neither of you had ever fully seen before. The message left their hands with a quiet sense of peace. There was no rush to check for a reply. No anxious counting of minutes. They simply sat there, feeling lighter than they had in years. Sometimes the greatest change doesn't happen when another person answers. It happens the moment you finally become honest with yourself. Don't skip, because the next part of this story unfolded in the gentlest way imaginable. As the evening slowly gave way to night, they found themselves smiling at something they hadn't noticed before. Every time they had imagined reaching out to you in the past, fear had always been louder than hope. This time was different. Hope wasn't trying to overpower fear. It had quietly replaced it. For the first time, they weren't wondering whether they were doing the right thing. They knew they were. Not because they expected a particular outcome, but because truth no longer felt heavy when it was finally spoken. Something important is waiting for you. While they waited, they began remembering dozens of little moments that once seemed too ordinary to matter. A conversation that lasted only a few minutes. A laugh that appeared at exactly the right time. A sentence you spoke without realizing how deeply it would stay with them. Looking back, they understood something remarkable. The biggest moments had never been the ones everyone noticed. The biggest moments were the quiet ones. The ones where your kindness appeared without asking for recognition. The ones where you listened instead of trying to fix everything. The ones where you made them feel accepted without ever asking them to become someone else. Those memories had quietly become the foundation of everything they now understood about love. As the night grew quieter, someone close noticed the peaceful expression on their face. "You finally look like yourself again." They smiled. "I think I finally stopped pretending I was searching." Those words carried more truth than anyone around them realized. Because they had never truly been searching for someone new. They had been searching for the courage to admit where their heart had already chosen to remain. Stay till the end. Just then, the sound they hadn't expected gently interrupted the silence. A notification. They looked at the screen but didn't open it immediately. Instead, they took one slow breath. Not from nervousness. From gratitude. Whatever those words contained, they already knew one thing had changed forever. The distance that once felt impossible no longer existed inside their heart. Then they opened the message. The first line made them stop completely. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't complicated. It simply read, "I've been hoping we'd talk again." In that single sentence, they realized something beautiful. While they had been wondering if you had forgotten, you had quietly been leaving a place for them in your own heart as well. And as they began reading the rest of the message, one unexpected detail appeared, something you had kept to yourself for a very long time, waiting for the exact moment when the truth could finally be shared.